Claire hadn't realized how heavy her heart had become until her son insisted she take a break. Life after her husband's passing had turned quiet, almost hollow. Each morning felt the same: coffee gone cold, an empty chair at the table, and long hours spent pretending she was fine. She had stopped traveling, stopped laughing much, and started living through small routines that made her feel safe but not alive. So when Ethan, her 25-year-old son, showed up at her doorstep one Friday afternoon with a determined look and a packed duffel bag, she was caught off guard. "Mom," he said, smiling that warm, boyish smile she hadn't seen in a while. "We're going away for the weekend." Claire blinked in surprise. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere peaceful," he said simply, refusing to tell her more. "You need a change of air." Part of her wanted to refuse. She wasn't used to surprises anymore. But something in Ethan's voice made her stop. He wasn't just suggesting a trip. It felt like he was trying to fix something unspoken between them. So she sighed, grabbed her coat, and went along the drive, took them through long winding roads surrounded by forests touched with gold and red leaves. Autumn had painted the world in warmth, and though Claire rarely paid attention to such things anymore, she found herself gazing out the window, letting the scenery soften her thoughts. Ethan played quiet, music-soft piano melodies that reminded her of their family home before everything changed. They barely talked during the drive, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of memories of the little boy who once sat in the back seat, asking endless questions, now grown into a man guiding her through the same roads. After a few hours, the car turned into a gravel path leading to a lakeside hotel. The building was beautiful in a quiet, rustic way. Wooden balconies overlooked the calm water, and soft mist floated over the surface, making it look like a dream. Claire stepped out of the car and took a deep breath of the cool Vermont air. It smelled of pine and rain. For the first time in a long while, she felt her shoulders relax. "Do you like it?" Ethan asked, watching her reaction closely. "It's lovely," she admitted, smiling faintly. "You really planned this?" He nodded. "I thought it would be good for you." For us, the room they checked into was cozy, with a fireplace, a large mirror on one wall, and a view of the lake that caught the late sunlight just right. Claire ran her hand along the window frame, watching the golden light fade into the trees. It felt peaceful, almost healing. Yet something tugged quietly at her heart. After they unpacked, Ethan suggested dinner at the hotel's restaurant. The dining area was small but warm, filled with the gentle hum of quiet conversations and the smell of baked bread. Claire noticed how grown-up her son looked, now how calm, how careful. He asked about her garden, about her book club, about little things. But his tone carried something deeper, something he wasn't saying. When they finished eating, they took a slow walk back to their room. The hallway lights glowed softly, and the wooden floor creaked under their feet. Claire felt tired, but it wasn't just physical. It was the kind of tiredness that came from years of pretending she was stronger than she felt. Inside the room, Ethan stood near the large mirror on the wall. His reflection was caught in the dim light, his face thoughtful. He didn't move for a moment, just stared like he was seeing something beyond the glass. Claire noticed it immediately. "Ethan," she said gently, placing her sweater on the chair, "what are you thinking about?" He didn't answer right away. His expression was distant, like his thoughts were far away from the room they were standing in. The reflection in the mirror looked serious, older somehow, as if the weight of the world sat quietly on his shoulders. She waited, patient but curious. "You've been quiet all day. Did something happen?" Finally, he turned slightly toward her, his eyes soft but uncertain. "Mom, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." The tone in his voice made her heart tighten. It wasn't the kind of tone children used when talking to their parents. It was the voice of a man trying to protect someone he loved, yet afraid of what his words might do. Claire sat down on the edge of the bed. "You're worrying me," she said softly. "Just say it." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It's not bad," he said quickly, noticing the concern in her eyes. I've been thinking about you lately. A lot." Her brows furrowed slightly. "About me?" "Yeah," he said, his gaze drifting back to the mirror. About how you've been living. Since Dad. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was heavy. Claire's throat tightened, though she tried to smile. You don't need to worry about me, Ethan. I'm fine. He looked at her reflection, not meeting her eyes directly. That's what you always say. Something in the way he said it pierced her. She wanted to respond, but the words caught in her chest. He wasn't accusing her. He was reaching out, quietly trying to understand. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing softly against the window pane. The lake rippled under the moonlight, and the faint scent of rain filled the air again. Claire stood up and walked toward the mirror, standing beside him. Together, their reflections looked almost like two different stories, sharing the same frame, one of youth and hope, the other of time and quiet endurance. She met his eyes in the mirror. You've always been too thoughtful, she said with a small smile. Just like your father. Ethan's lips curved slightly, but his eyes didn't lose that serious glint. Maybe, but I just want to make sure you're really okay. The moment hung there, soft and delicate. Claire wanted to tell him she was okay, truly okay, but deep down she knew he was right. She had been living in half-light, keeping her heart tucked away behind memories she was too scared to disturb. When Ethan finally spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost trembling. Mom, there's something I need to tell you. Claire's breath caught. The room suddenly felt still, as if the air itself was waiting. His tone wasn't casual, it carried weight, emotion, and something else she couldn't name yet. What is it, Ethan? She asked, her voice gentle but nervous. He hesitated, his gaze still locked on the mirror, on their shared reflection. Not now, he said softly. Maybe tomorrow. I just needed to say that I love you, and that this trip, it means something. Before she could ask more, he smiled faintly and turned away, heading toward his bed. The light from the lamp reflected off the mirror, catching both their faces in a soft glow, one full of quiet mystery, the other filled with a mother's worry. As she watched him settle down, Claire felt her heart stir with questions. What had he meant by "it means something"? Why had he looked so emotional? That night, as she lay awake, listening to the faint sound of the rain, she couldn't stop seeing his reflection in her mind. The way he had stared into the mirror like he was searching for something lost, something deeper than his own face. The next morning, soft sunlight spilled into the hotel room through thin white curtains. Claire woke to the sound of gentle waves brushing against the lake outside. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The room felt strange yet calm, filled with the scent of rain-soaked wood and coffee from the cafe downstairs. Ethan was sitting by the window, staring out at the mist floating over the water. He looked thoughtful again, quiet in a way that made her uneasy. Morning, she said softly. He turned and smiled faintly. Morning, Mom. Did you sleep okay? She nodded, though she hadn't slept much at all. You? Yeah, he replied, but his voice didn't sound convincing. He stood, stretched, and said, Let's go for a walk after breakfast. I want to show you something by the lake, Claire agreed, though she noticed he was avoiding her eyes. She didn't press him, he'd tell her when he was ready. Still, she couldn't ignore the heaviness in her chest. Last night's conversation replayed in her mind, the way he stared at the mirror, the way his voice trembled when he said he needed to tell her something. Downstairs, the breakfast area was quiet. The hotel served pancakes, fresh fruit, and coffee that smelled strong enough to wake anyone. Claire tried to make small talk, but Ethan kept drifting into thought. He smiled when she spoke, but it was distant, almost forced. Finally, as they ate, she asked gently, Ethan, are you sure everything's all right? You've been quieter than usual. He looked up, his fork pausing midair. I'm fine, Mom, I promise. Then, after a moment, he added softly, I've just been thinking a lot about what? She asked. He hesitated, then said about life. About us. About Dad. Claire's heart tightened. She hadn't heard Ethan mention his father much these past years. She watched him closely, wondering what was stirring inside him. They finished breakfast and went down the narrow path that led to the lake. The air was crisp, and the world felt fresh after the night's rain. Ducks floated lazily on the surface, and the mountains reflected faintly in the water. For a moment, Claire felt peaceful until Ethan spoke again. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you ever think about what you could have done differently in life?" The question caught her by surprise. She stopped walking and looked at him. "Differently? What do you mean?" He kicked a pebble into the water and watched the ripples spread. "I mean, after Dad died, did you ever think about starting over? Maybe moving somewhere new? Meeting someone new?" Claire's breath caught. "Ethan," she said carefully, "why are you asking me that?" He shrugged, but his expression stayed serious. "Because I've been thinking about how much you gave up. For me? For Dad. You spent years taking care of everyone else. And now you're just alone." His words were gentle, not accusing, but they hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to tell him she wasn't lonely, that her life was fine. But as she looked at the lake, she realized she couldn't say it honestly. She had built walls around herself, quiet, safe walls that kept out pain, but also joy. "I had my time, Ethan," she said softly. "I had love. I had your father. Some people don't get even that much." He turned toward her, his eyes full of emotion. "But that doesn't mean it has to end there, Mom. You still have time. You still have a life ahead of you." She smiled sadly. "You sound older than your years." He gave a small laugh. "Maybe I am. But I see things now. You've been my whole world since Dad passed, and I can't stand the thought of you fading into routine. You deserve to be happy again." Claire's throat tightened. No one had said that to her in years. For a moment, she didn't know what to do with the warmth that rose in her chest. They kept walking along the lake, letting the silence fill the spaces between them. The air smelled of wet leaves, and the light shimmered through the trees. Claire watched Ethan's reflection move beside hers in the water. He was so much like his father, the way he walked. It's the way he carried quiet thoughts in his eyes. "Ethan," she said softly after a while, "your father would be proud of you." He smiled, his voice low. "I hope so. I still miss him, you know." "I do too," she whispered. "Every day." Stopped by a wooden bench overlooking the water and sat down. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Mom, when I was little, I used to think you were the strongest person in the world. No matter what happened, you just kept going. But now I realize you were just holding everything together for me." Claire turned toward him, her eyes glistening. "That's what mothers do." He shook his head. "No, Mom, that's what you did. You never stopped to ask what you needed." She didn't answer right away. The truth stung not because it was harsh, but because it was real. She had buried her needs so deep that even she forgot what they were. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees. Claire looked out over the water, lost in thought. "You know," she said quietly, "when your father died, it felt like a part of me went with him. I didn't think I'd ever find that part again. So I filled my life with small things, cooking, gardening, books, because they were safe. They didn't hurt." Ethan's voice softened. "And do they make you happy?" She turned to him, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Sometimes, but not like before." He reached out and gently took her hand. "Then maybe it's time to let the world surprise you again." The words sank into her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She had spent so long being the caretaker that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. And now, here was her son, the boy she had raised, giving her permission to live again. They sat there quietly for a while, watching the water move. A small boat drifted across the lake, and distant laughter echoed from the other shore. Claire's heart felt heavier and lighter all at once as they stood to leave. She glanced at him and said softly, "You brought me here for a reason, didn't you?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I wanted to remind you that the world still has beauty, and that you still have a place in it." Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look she gave him said everything, a mix of pride, love, and gratitude so deep it hurt. That evening, when they returned to the hotel, Claire stood by the window, watching the sky turn orange and pink. Ethan was behind her, lost in thought again. She looked at his reflection in the glass and realized how much he'd grown, not just in years, but in heart. maybe he was right. Maybe her story wasn't finished. Maybe love, in its quiet forms, still waited somewhere in the world. She turned to him with a soft smile. "You're a good man, Ethan. Your father would have said the same." He looked at her and said gently, "I just want you to be happy, Mom." The words stayed with her long after he fell asleep that night. Claire lay awake, listening to the sound of the rain against the window. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped in her memories. She felt something different, something new stirring inside her. It wasn't peace, exactly. It was possibility. And though she didn't yet know what awaited her in the days to come, she sensed that the conversation by the lake had opened a door she hadn't dared to touch before. A door that might lead her, once again, toward light, warmth, and maybe even love. The rain began that evening soft at first, then heavier, turning the lake into a field of silver ripples. The hotel grew quiet, and the soft hum of the heater filled the room. Claire sat on the bed, her thoughts tangled like threads she couldn't untie. The words Ethan had spoken by the lake replayed in her mind. "You deserve to be happy again." They had settled deep inside her, stirring something she hadn't felt in years. Across the room, Ethan stood again in front of the tall hotel mirror. He had done this more than once during their stay, and Claire couldn't help but notice. His eyes weren't fixed on his reflection in the usual way. It was as if he was staring beyond it, searching for something invisible. The reflection of his face looked older, more thoughtful than it should for his age. "What's caught your attention there?" she asked gently, trying to keep her tone light. He didn't turn around right away. "Nothing really," he murmured. "Just thinking." She rose from the bed and walked closer, her slippers making soft sounds on the carpet. "You've been thinking a lot lately," she said. "Is something bothering you?" Ethan met her eyes through the mirror, and the reflection of their faces side by side startled her for a moment. His eyes looked tired, but honest. "Do you ever feel," he began quietly, "like time just stopped for you one day?" Her chest tightened. The question hit too close to the truth. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. He turned to face her fully now, his voice low and careful. "I mean, after Dad died, it's like your life froze, like you stopped moving forward. Everything around you changed, but you didn't." Claire's throat ached as she tried to answer. "Losing him wasn't something I could just move on from, Ethan." "I know," he said quickly, nodding. "I know that. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "It's hard watching you live every day like you're waiting for something that's never coming back." She sighed, her eyes falling to the floor. "You think I don't notice that too? That I don't feel it?" "I think you've buried it," he said quietly. "You act strong for everyone else. But I see it, Mom. I always have." His words broke something fragile inside her. For years, she'd believed she had hidden her grief well, locking it behind smiles and small talk. But standing there in that quiet room, she realized Ethan had seen through it all along. She turned to look at the mirror again. The reflection showed a woman who had aged in ways time alone couldn't explain, a woman still carrying the weight of yesterday. Behind her stood her grown son, a man now, who somehow understood her pain better than she did herself. "I wanted to give you stability," she whispered. "I didn't want my sadness to become yours." Ethan shook his head. "You gave me love, Mom, more than enough. But you forgot to save some of it for yourself." She closed her eyes, swallowing hard. "Maybe I was scared," she admitted, "of trying to live again and losing everything a second time." He stepped closer, his tone gentle but firm. "You won't lose everything. You might find something new." She looked at him through tears. "You talk like you've lived twice your age," smiled faintly. "Maybe I had to. Losing Dad made me grow up fast. But it also made me see how short life really is. You always told me to live fully, remember?" She nodded, the memory stinging her heart. "Then why don't you?" he asked softly. The question lingered in the air, heavier than the rain outside. Claire didn't know what to say. She walked to the window and looked out at the gray sky, watching droplets race each other down the glass. The reflection of the room shimmered faintly on the window pane, hers, and Ethan's figures blurred by the light. I don't even know where to begin, she said quietly. He stepped beside her, folding his arms. Maybe by letting yourself want something again? Want something? She echoed. Yeah, he said. To laugh again. To meet people? To stop living like you're in the past. Her lips parted, but no words came. He was right, and hearing it from him made it hit harder. The rain softened, tapping gently now, as though the world outside had paused to listen. She turned toward him, her eyes filled with emotion. Ethan, I never wanted you to feel responsible for me. I don't, he said quickly, but I care. And I see how strong you've been. You carried Dad's memory, raised me, and built a life again. But now, it's time you live for yourself. She smiled faintly, tears slipping down her cheeks. You sound like your father. Ethan's voice softened. He'd want the same thing for you, Mom. You know that. She nodded slowly, remembering her husband's laugh, the way he used to hold her hand when they'd walk by the beach. A wave of bittersweet warmth filled her chest. It's hard, she whispered. I know, he said gently. But you've done harder things. They stood there in silence, side by side, the sound of the rain filling the gaps between their breaths. Then, after a long pause, Ethan looked at her reflection in the mirror again. You look different when you smile, he said quietly. Like the world's lighter. She let out a soft laugh. I've forgotten what that feels like. Then remember, he said. Start now. For the first time in years, Claire didn't push the thought away. She let it linger, warm and fragile, like the first flicker of light after a storm. Mom, Ethan said suddenly, his voice trembling just slightly. There's something I wanted to tell you last night. She looked at him, her heart tightening again. What is it? He took a deep breath. When I brought you here, it wasn't just for a break. I wanted you to see this place because it's where Dad once planned to take you. Before he got sick, he told me about it once, years ago. Her breath caught. He told you that? Ethan nodded, his eyes glassy. He wanted to surprise you for your anniversary. Said he'd found the perfect lake. Peaceful, quiet, beautiful, just like you. But he never got the chance. Claire pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes, falling silently. The room blurred for a moment, memories of laughter and love flooding back. Ethan continued softly. When I found out about this place, I knew I had to bring you here. Not to make you sad, but to remind you that he wanted you to keep living. He wanted you to have moments like this. Claire turned toward him, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. Oh, Ethan. He stepped forward and hugged her tightly. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. She clung to him, her tears falling freely now. For the first time in years, she let herself cry not out of sorrow, but out of release. When she finally looked up, she caught the reflection in the mirror again. The image wasn't of grief anymore, was of love, connection, and something new beginning. I think, she whispered, he'd be proud of you too. Ethan smiled, wiping his eyes. Then I've done something right. Claire looked back at the mirror one last time before turning away. The woman staring back didn't look frozen anymore. She looked alive, fragile but brave. Outside, the clouds began to part and faint sunlight spilled across the lake. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, clean and new. For the first time in years, she felt ready not to forget, but to begin again. And in that quiet hotel room, standing beside her son, she realized that sometimes healing doesn't come from leaving the past behind, but from finally facing it, together. The morning after the rain was clear and calm. Sunlight touched the edges of the lake, turning the water into gold. The air was crisp, the smell of wet pines still fresh. Claire stood by the window, wrapped in a soft shawl, watching small waves shimmer under the gentle breeze. Everything felt lighter, as if the storm had washed away more than just the night. It had taken a little bit of her sadness with it. Ethan was still asleep, one arm hanging over the edge of his bed, his breathing steady. For a moment, she simply looked at him, the boy she'd raised. Now the man who had helped her find pieces of herself she thought were gone forever. She smiled faintly, whispering, "You're more like your father than you'll ever know." When he woke up, he found her sitting near the window with 2 cups of coffee. "You're up early," he said, stretching. "I couldn't sleep," she replied softly. The morning was too beautiful to waste. He joined her by the window, taking the cup she handed him. The silence between them felt warm this time, peaceful. "About last night," Ethan began. She stopped him gently. "You don't have to apologize, Ethan. You've told me the truth. I needed to hear it." He hesitated, then nodded. "I just didn't want to upset you." Claire smiled, looking out toward the glimmering lake. "You didn't. You reminded me that life still has color in it. I just forgot how to see it." He looked at her with quiet pride. "That's all I wanted." After breakfast, they decided to explore the small town nearby. It was a cozy place with little shops and friendly faces. The air smelled like baked bread and coffee. As they walked past a flower shop, Claire stopped, drawn by a small bouquet of lilies displayed by the window. Her husband used to bring her lilies every anniversary. For a moment, she just stood there, her eyes soft and distant. Ethan noticed and said gently, "You should get them." She smiled, shaking her head. "Maybe later." They continued walking until they reached the hotel's cafe, a small rustic place filled with warm light and chatter. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a smile that carried both warmth and loss. He greeted them cheerfully. "Good morning, folks. You must be staying at the Lakeside Suite, right? You picked the best view." Claire returned his smile. "We did. It's beautiful here." The man laughed softly. "That's what my wife used to say. She loved the lake." There was a brief pause, then he added, "She passed away a few years ago, but I stayed. This place keeps her close." Claire's heart softened immediately. She knew that kind of love, that kind of ache. "I understand," she said gently. The man's name was Tom. He ran the cafe alone, but didn't seem lonely, just quiet. Like someone who had learned to live with memories without letting them drown him. He poured them coffee, and soon the three of them were talking as if they'd known each other for years. Tom had an easy sense of humor, and the way he spoke reminded Claire of something she hadn't felt in a long time, comfort. Ethan watched the two of them talk. For the first time, he saw his mother freely laugh. Her eyes sparkled, her shoulders relaxed, and there was light in her face he hadn't seen in years. When they left the cafe, Ethan turned to her with a playful smile. "You two seem to get along well." Claire gave a soft laugh. "He's a nice man. Reminds me that kindness still exists." Ethan grinned. "See, I told you. The world's not done giving you good things." She stopped walking, touched by his words. "You know," she said quietly, "this trip wasn't what I expected. I thought it would just be a few days away. But it feels like I've been woken up." "That's all I wanted, Mom," Ethan said. "To remind you that there's still life waiting for you." They returned to the hotel as the afternoon sun turned golden. Claire sat by the lake while Ethan went to make a phone call. The air was calm, the reflection of the trees rippling across the water. She closed her eyes and listened to the birds, to the soft movement of the waves, to her own steady heartbeat. For the first time in years, her thoughts didn't drift backward. They stayed in the moment. When Ethan returned, he found her gazing at the water. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She smiled. "About how I forgot to live for myself. About how lucky I am that you reminded me." He sat beside her. "You know, Dad used to tell me that love doesn't die with people, it stays, waiting to be seen again in small ways." Claire nodded, tears forming, but not falling. He was right. "I see it now. It's in you, in this place. In every sunrise, I almost stopped noticing." They sat quietly until the sun dipped low. Then, almost as if destiny had planned it, Tom from the cafe walked down the path toward the lake, holding a small lantern. "Evening stroll?" he called out with a smile. Claire smiled back. "Seems like a good evening for it." He joined them, and soon the three were talking again. It's time about everything and nothing the lake. Music, how fast time moved. It was easy, natural, and for once, Claire didn't feel like she was walking through her past. She was part of the present again. When Tom excused himself, Ethan turned to her with a knowing look. "You should talk to him again before we leave tomorrow." Claire laughed lightly. "You really don't stop, do you?" He shrugged. "I just want to see you happy." That night, back in the hotel room, Claire stood before the mirror, the same one that had reflected so much sadness only nights ago. But this time, her reflection looked different. There was a spark in her eyes, a softness in her smile. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived here carrying quiet grief. She was someone rediscovering herself. Ethan watched her from the bed, smiling. "You look like you're thinking about something." She turned toward him. "Just about how proud your father would be of you. You brought me back to life, Ethan." He smiled, touched. "No, Mom. You just needed a reason to open the door again." Claire walked over, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Thank you, sweetheart."